really hard. Those things that I wrote in those diaries and my journals were locked in a box. I never wanted anyone to see them. And for some reason, I was like, all right, let's open it up.
What made you change your mind?
Because I know there's a lot of people who have been abused and have lived like really hard times, and I just felt like I'm here for you.
In 1987, a 15-year-old girl named Christina Applegate walked onto the set of Married, with children for the first time. She had just been cast as Kelly Bundy, the blonde daughter known for her bold jokes and provocative image. Standing beside her was Ed O'Neill, already in his 40s, playing Al Bundy, the bitter, frustrated father at the center of the show. On screen, they were simply father and daughter in one of the most controversial sitcoms of the time. But off-camera, people on the set began noticing something unusual. Ed O'Neill often kept a close eye on Christina. He would stand near her during certain scenes. Sometimes he would step into conversations and quietly change the subject. At the time, no one explained why. For decades, those moments were barely talked about. Until recently, when Christina Applegate began sharing what really happened behind the scenes when she was just 15 years old in Hollywood. The Hidden Beginning. Ed O'Neill as protector and father figure. When filming for Married. With Children began in 1987, Christina Applegate was only 15 years old. She had acted since childhood, but this was the first time she joined a major network sitcom as a regular cast member. The role of Kelly Bundy quickly became central to the show's humor. The character was written as a stereotypical dumb blonde, and many of the jokes relied on flirtation, double meanings, and provocative situations. For a teenage actress, it was an unusual environment. On the same set stood Ed O'Neill, more than 25 years older than her. He played Al Bundy, the cynical shoe salesman who constantly complained about his family and his life. By that time, Ed already had more life experience and a clear understanding of how television production worked. Within the first weeks of filming, he began noticing how young Christina really was compared with the tone of the material around her. According to stories Christina later shared in interviews, Ed quietly began looking out for her. He rarely made dramatic gestures. Instead, he stayed close during scenes that might make a teenage performer uncomfortable, when conversations among adults on the set became too explicit. He sometimes stepped in and steered the discussion somewhere else. He did it calmly, without drawing attention. Over time, people on the set began to notice that Ed treated Christina differently from the other cast members, not with favoritism, but with a protective instinct. Long shooting days were common for a network sitcom in the late 1980s. Rehearsals happened during the week, and episodes were filmed in front of a live studio audience. Christina was still in school at the time, balancing classes with the pressure of a national television show. Ed often checked on her between takes, asking whether she had eaten or whether she was tired after long hours under studio lights. Sometimes the gestures were small. Sometimes they were more direct. A few crew members later recalled that Ed occasionally made sure she had a safe ride home when production ended late at night. As the seasons passed, the relationship naturally evolved. In the beginning, Christina relied heavily on Ed's guidance. Sitcom acting required precise comedic timing, knowing when to pause for laughter, when to react, and how to deliver a punchline in front of a live audience. Ed had strong instincts for that rhythm, and he often gave quiet advice between scenes. Christina absorbed those lessons quickly. By the early 1990s, the show had become one of the most recognizable sitcoms on American television. Christina was no longer the nervous teenager who had walked onto the set in 1987. She had grown more confident and began experimenting with her own delivery and improvisation. Occasionally, she suggested small changes to a line or reaction. Ed noticed the transformation. Their dynamic gradually shifted from mentor and student to something closer to professional partners on screen. Still, the emotional foundation of their relationship remained the same. Christina later said that during those years she often thought of Ed as a father figure, from the age of 15 until the show ended nearly a decade later. Much of her life unfolded inside that studio. The cast and crew became a kind of extended family. Several people who worked on the series remembered moments that illustrated that bond. One crew member recalled Ed once calling Christina's mother to reassure her after a particularly intense week of filming. Another remembered him quietly objecting when producers tried to push certain jokes further than he believed was appropriate for a teenage actress. He never spoke publicly about those actions. He simply believed it was the right thing to do. In an industry where young performers were often left to navigate difficult situations on their own, that quiet protection mattered more than many people realized at the time. For Christina, those early years, unmarried, with children, were not only the start of a successful career, they were also the years when a lasting bond formed between two actors who had begun as fictional father and daughter, but slowly developed something far more real behind the cameras. The 1989 boycott crisis, the first major test. By 1989, Married, with Children had already gained attention for its sharp, provocative humor. But that year, the show faced a crisis that nearly ended it. The controversy began after an episode titled Her Cups Runneth Over. The episode included jokes and scenes that some viewers considered inappropriate for network television. One viewer in particular, Terry Racolta from Michigan, was outraged after watching it with her family. Racolta launched a national boycott campaign against the show. She wrote letters to advertisers and urged them to stop supporting the program. Her campaign quickly gained media attention. Within weeks, major companies, including Coca-Cola and McDonald's, pulled their advertising from the broadcast inside the network offices. Executives began to panic. Advertising revenue was at risk, and some insiders feared the show might be canceled. On the set, the tension was immediate. At the time, Christina Applegate was only 17. The series had become the center of her career and her daily life. Suddenly, it looked as if everything could disappear, according to interviews she gave years later. The uncertainty frightened her. She felt too young and powerless to influence what was happening. But others on the set reacted differently. Ed O'Neill tried to keep the younger actors calm, especially Christina and David Faustino, who played Bud Bundy. Ed had seen controversies come and go in Hollywood. To him, the boycott was serious, but not the end of the world. He reminded them that television history was full of shows that survived criticism. Ed also spoke publicly in defense of the series in interviews with reporters. He argued that the show was satire. The humor exaggerated the dysfunction of the Bundy family to mock American culture, not celebrate it. He made sure to emphasize that the young actors on the show were professionals doing their jobs. What happened next surprised almost everyone. The boycott brought massive publicity to the sitcom. News programs discussed it. Newspapers debated whether the show had crossed a line. Curious viewers who had never watched before suddenly tuned in to see what the controversy was about. Instead of collapsing, the ratings rose. The attempted boycott had the opposite effect. The show became even more famous, and the network decided to keep it on the air. Back on the set, the cast slowly relaxed. What had started as a frightening moment became something they joked about. Some members of the crew even referred to the boycott as a strange kind of badge of honor. For Christina, the experience left a lasting impression. She had watched how Ed handled the crisis with patience, calm, and a sense of perspective. Instead of reacting with panic, he treated the situation as part of the unpredictable nature of television. It was one of the first major lessons she learned about surviving in Hollywood, and it strengthened the bond between them even more. In the middle of a public controversy that threatened the entire show, the cast discovered that their connection off-screen had become something very close to a real family. The Unexpected End in 1997. A story without a proper goodbye after 11 seasons on television. Married. With Children came to an abrupt end in 1997. There was no grand finale episode, no carefully written farewell for the Bundy family. The network simply decided not to renew the series for another season. Production stopped quietly, and the cast learned that the show was over. For a sitcom that had run for more than a decade, the ending felt strangely unfinished. Within days, the familiar studio set began to disappear. The living room where hundreds of scenes had been filmed was dismantled piece by piece. Props were packed away. Crew members moved on to other projects. For Christina Applegate, the moment was deeply emotional. She had joined the show at 15 years old. By the time it ended, she was 26. Almost her entire transition from teenager to adult had taken place on that set. The cast had celebrated birthdays together. They had watched each other grow older, change, and face personal challenges. Over time, the group had become something more than co-workers. They had become a kind of family. When the show ended without warning, Christina later said it left a strange emptiness. There was no final moment of closure, no last gathering that clearly marked the end of that chapter of her life. Yet one relationship did not disappear when the cameras stopped. Ed O'Neill and Christina stayed in contact after the series ended. They spoke occasionally and saw each other over the years as their careers continued in different directions. Ed sometimes offered advice when Christina considered new projects. He remained a steady presence, much like he had been during the early days of the show. What had started as a fictional father-daughter relationship on television had slowly turned into something genuine, even after the Bundy house was taken apart and the cast moved on. That connection remained. Life after the show and the 2021 MS diagnosis, a personal battle. After Married. With Children ended in 1997, Christina Applegate moved quickly into new projects. She worked hard to avoid being permanently associated with the character of Kelly Bundy. In 2002, she appeared in the comedy film The Sweetest Thing, alongside Cameron Diaz and Selma Blair. The film performed well at the box office and helped reposition her as a leading comedy actress. 2 years later, she appeared in Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy with Will Ferrell. Her performance again showed strong comedic timing. Television also brought success. In 2007, she starred in the ABC series Samantha Who. Her role earned her a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Guest Actress. More than a decade later, she returned to television with the Netflix series Dead to Me, where critics praised her emotional performance. Meanwhile, Ed O'Neill also entered a new stage of his career. In 2009, he joined the cast of Modern Family as Jay Pritchett. The series became one of the most successful sitcoms of its era and won multiple Primetime Emmy Awards. Despite their separate careers, Ed often spoke warmly about Christina in interviews. He frequently said he was proud of the actress she had become. But in August 2021, Christina shared news that changed her life. On August 10, 2021, she publicly announced that she had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, commonly known as MS. The disease affects the central nervous system and can damage communication between the brain and the body. For Christina, the symptoms had already begun to appear. She experienced numbness in her legs and difficulties with balance. Walking became harder. Over time, she began using a cane to help with mobility. The diagnosis forced her to restructure daily life. Filming schedules became more demanding. Physical exhaustion arrived faster. Even simple movements sometimes required more effort than before. Beyond the physical symptoms, there was also an emotional impact. Christina later admitted that she had moments of grief about the future she once imagined. The illness meant accepting that some parts of her life would change permanently. Yet, she continued working. She finished filming the final season of Dead to Me while managing the illness. For many viewers who had grown up watching Kelly Bundy, the contrast was striking. The teenage sitcom star, once known for carefree comedy, was now openly facing a chronic neurological disease. But the resilience she showed surprised very few people who had known her since the early days of television. Those years on the set of Married with Children had already prepared her for long days, public scrutiny, and unexpected challenges. And the support system she had built during that time, especially the people who had stood beside her from the beginning, remained an important source of strength as she faced one of the most difficult chapters of her life. The cast responds. Support during a difficult time. When Christina Applegate publicly revealed on August 10, 2021, that she had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, messages of support quickly began appearing from across the entertainment industry. But some of the most meaningful reactions came from the people who had known her since she was a teenager. Among the first to reach out was Ed O'Neill. According to people close to the cast of Married with Children, Ed contacted Christina soon after the announcement. Their relationship had already lasted more than 3 decades, and his response reflected the same protective instinct he had shown years earlier on the set. He wanted to make sure she was not facing the situation alone. Other members of the Bundy family also spoke publicly. Katie Sagal, who played Peggy Bundy, shared supportive messages and praised Christina's strength. David Faustino, who played Bud Bundy, also expressed encouragement and admiration for how she continued working despite the diagnosis. Amanda Bears, who played Marcy Darcy, remained in contact as well and voiced support for her longtime co-star. Over the years, fans had often asked whether the cast would reunite for a special project or revival. After Christina's diagnosis, several of the actors made one thing clear: if any reunion ever happened, it would have to include her and be built around her presence. The response from the cast reminded many fans that the connection formed during those 11 seasons had never truly disappeared. For the audience, the Bundy family had always been exaggerated and dysfunctional. On screen, they argued constantly and mocked each other in almost every episode. But off-screen, something much more genuine had developed. More than 30 years after the show first aired, the actors still stood beside one another, and during one of the most difficult moments of Christina Applegate's life, that support became a powerful reminder that the family viewers watched every week on television had, in many ways, been real all along. Public moments, standing ovations, and a star on the Walk of Fame. In November 2022, Christina Applegate appeared at one of the most emotional events of her career. She was honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It was her first major public appearance since revealing her diagnosis with multiple sclerosis. Christina arrived using a cane to help with balance. Cameras captured the moment as she slowly walked toward the podium. The crowd included friends, industry colleagues, and fans who had followed her career since the days of Married with Children. During her speech, Christina spoke openly about living with MS. She also thanked several people who had shaped her life and career, including Ed O'Neill. Her voice became emotional as she described the support she had received over the years. 2 months later, in January 2023, Christina appeared again at the Primetime Emmy Awards. As she walked onto the stage, the audience rose to their feet in a long standing ovation. The applause continued for several moments. Christina responded in the same way she had handled difficult situations throughout her career, using humor. She joked about the attention, lightening the atmosphere while still acknowledging the seriousness of her condition. Behind the scenes, people close to the event later shared that Ed O'Neill remained attentive throughout the evening. After the ceremony, he checked on Christina to make sure she was feeling well. Moments like these showed something important about Christina's character. Despite the physical challenges of MS, she continued to appear publicly, speak honestly about the disease, and raise awareness for others facing the same diagnosis. At the same time, she kept the humor that had defined much of her career. The same comedic warmth that once made Kelly Bundy famous was still there, now combined with a resilience that many viewers found even more inspiring. Hidden stories behind the scenes over the years. Many small moments from the set of Married, with children, never made it into official interviews or press releases. Yet these moments helped shape the chemistry that audiences saw on screen. One of the most important influences came from Ed O'Neill and his approach to comedy. Sitcoms follow a script, but timing often depends on how actors react in the moment. Ed sometimes challenged Christina Applegate by slightly changing his delivery during rehearsals. Instead of repeating a line exactly the same way, he might add a pause, emphasize a different word, or react unexpectedly. These small curveballs forced Christina to think quickly and respond naturally. Over time, it sharpened her improvisation skills. Christina later said those moments helped her understand rhythm in comedy. She learned how to adjust her timing in front of a live audience, and how to recover when a scene took an unexpected turn. Ed also played another role behind the cameras. When jokes or off-camera conversations drifted into territory he felt was inappropriate for a younger cast member, he sometimes stepped in quietly, rather than creating conflict. He redirected the conversation, or changed the subject. Crew members later remembered that he treated the set almost like a workplace he felt responsible for protecting. At the same time, many of the show's most memorable running jokes grew naturally from the cast's real chemistry. Ed's character often bragged about his high school football days. Katie Sagal, who played Peggy Bundy, developed the exaggerated image of a wife who refused to cook or clean. Meanwhile, Kelly Bundy's famously clueless behavior became funnier as Christina added her own reactions and timing to the lines. Off-camera, the atmosphere was often relaxed. Actors spent long hours together during rehearsals and tapings, and small routines developed over time. Some crew members recalled Ed bringing coffee onto the stage during early rehearsals. Katie Sagal occasionally gave Christina advice about navigating the industry as a young actress. David Faustino, who played Bud Bundy, often joked that the group felt more like siblings than co-workers. These everyday interactions rarely appeared in official stories about the show, yet they helped explain why the characters felt believable to viewers. The success of Married with Children did not come only from scripts or jokes. Much of its energy came from real relationships forming behind the cameras, relationships that allowed the actors to trust one another and take risks during performances. In many ways, the Bundy family worked on screen because something close to a real family had quietly developed off-screen. Conclusion: a bond that lasted more than 25 years after Married with Children ended. The series still reaches new audiences through reruns and streaming. The Bundy family continues to attract viewers who are curious about one of television's most unconventional sitcoms. In recent years, conversations about a reunion have slowly resurfaced through the podcast Messy. Christina Applegate has spoken openly about her life, her illness, and the people who supported her career. These discussions have led fans and former cast members to imagine a future reunion, perhaps as a documentary or special, centered around Christina. Yet the real legacy of the show may not be its jokes. It may be the relationships behind the scenes. The connection between Ed O'Neill and Christina began when she was a 15-year-old newcomer. Over time, it became a lasting bond that survived the end of the series, changing careers, and even serious illness, in an industry often defined by short-term success. Their story shows something different. Sometimes the most important thing Hollywood creates is not fame, but human connection. And some bonds, once formed, simply never fade.